Manufacturing sector appears to be a top priority of the Modi government. What steps could be taken to elevate this entire industry? Who better than the Executive Director of Century Plyboard, Keshav Bhajanka, for his incisive opinion on this entire issue and what perhaps could be expected in the union budget. Thank you very much, Keshav Bhajanka, Executive Director of Century Ply, for joining us. Let me straight away begin by asking you your primary expectations from the upcoming budget in terms of policies, incentives that could essentially benefit the manufacturing sector, specifically the plywood panel industry.
Thank you so much for having me. I think we should look at the budget in two parts, both the short term and the long term. In the long term, I think the government has been investing for the past few years in quite substantial manner on infrastructure. And I think this commitment to improve our infrastructure and to increase the long-term spend on infrastructure is going to help all industries, including manufacturing industries and industries related to real estate, such as ours. In the short term, I think that the government needs to put some thrust on housing, and the Prime Minister has already announced the Prime Minister Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana scheme, where I believe 30 million homes have already been announced, and I'm hoping that they further increase this number. Alongside the same, some sort of interest subsidies or interest exemptions on housing loans could perhaps spur further demand and boost the economy in the short term. As you know, real estate is a key component of economic growth. If you look at China or the US, the primary reason for the economic boom was the real estate sector, and I'm hoping the government puts a lot of thrust behind the same.
Mr. Bhajanka, in terms of some of the challenges that the industry essentially faces at this point in time, if you go by the numbers of the economic survey, it is quite optimistic. But how do you think that the government could address some of the issues in the upcoming budget?
I think one challenge that pretty much quite a few industries, including ours, are facing are inflated raw material costs. And due to this, the ability of manufacturers to sustain has become very difficult. I think one way that the government can address this is by lowering the interest burden overall. I don't know how much leeway the government has towards that, but I think that some sort of a support for manufacturing enterprises would really help.
And in terms, Mr. Bhajanka, the government's Make in India initiative, something that this government in the first two terms had essentially put a lot of focus on. It has undoubtedly had some sort of an impact on the manufacturing industry. What additional measures, particularly when it comes to Make in India, would you suggest in order to boost the local manufacturing capabilities?
I think already the investment in infrastructure that the government is undertaking is going to reduce our logistic cost. As you know, logistic cost in India is quite substantial when you compare it to other economies. I think this is a step in the right direction, but it will take some time to bring to fruition. I think at the other end of the spectrum, the Make in India initiative can be aided by sustainable exports. It gives us economies of scale. And in order to do this, the government needs to incentivize exports in a manner similar to what other countries such as China or Vietnam are already doing. I think certain more steps, particularly with regards to wood panel industry, will help us become or make this dream of Make in India a reality.
If there is one buzzword, Mr. Bhajanka, just ahead of this budget, it would be particularly about taxation. And whether at all, would you say that there perhaps could be certain specific tax reforms of financial incentives that you would essentially recommend that the government should be perhaps introducing in the budget to support what many would say growth and innovation in your sector and perhaps also in other sectors, which would give us a larger picture of how things are for us and what perhaps we could expect in the days to come?
I think lower tax rates is something that every citizen hopes for, but it might not be a distinct possibility. Having said that, I think if the government can take certain steps towards perhaps tax exemption on the interest rates for housing loans, or if the government can provide some sort of an impetus towards investments in real estate by virtue of a tax incentive, that could really help our sector and a lot of sectors related to us.
Mr. Bhajanka, as far as the economic survey goes, the macro picture essentially that is emerging is that we perhaps have been able to insulate ourselves from the kind of global tensions that we've witnessed. Do you believe that that lays the trajectory for the days to come, or perhaps there are some red areas that the government perhaps will have to look at?
No, I would say that, in terms of insulating ourselves from what is taking place globally, which is, I would say, a very, very poor scenario, the government has done a brilliant job. And we are hoping that this new resilient India continues. And by the looks of it, it's only going to get stronger and better. So I think we must give credit where credit is due. Today, India is in a position that perhaps every other economy in the world would love to be in.
Well, in fact, I want to also stress upon something that you've spoken many a times in the past, that is about sustainability now, which is becoming increasingly very, very important. Now, what steps do you believe that the government should be taking to promote sustainable manufacturing practices within your industry, and how can perhaps companies like Century Ply Boards contribute to this entire goal?
I think one area, particularly for the wood panel industry, is an increase in agroforestry. I think the government needs to recognize agroforestry as a form of agriculture which is providing employment to millions of people in the country. And if we can have some subsidies for farmers who partake in agroforestry, I think this serves two purposes. One, making our industry sustainable. Second, by increasing the green cover of India, making the country more sustainable. As you can see, air pollution across the country is a challenge. And the best way to address the same is through more agroforestry. So I'm hoping that the government does take up some steps to further boost agroforestry in India. And this can lead to a more sustainable and a greener India going forward.
Well, in fact, Mr. Bhajanka, if you see the kind of global conversation that has taken place, particularly with the Indian economy, the IMF prediction looking quite optimistic for India. Having said that, what's your understanding? Could there be any speed breakers, or would you say that we have been able to overcome the challenges after the pandemic?
And to be honest, I think we have navigated through most of the challenges after the pandemic beautifully as a country. And of course, some speed breakers might come, but we are hopeful that this trajectory will further speeden up rather than slow down.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Keshav Bhajanka, for joining us on this special broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me.